The awakening signal. The monitoring station orbiting Zelkor Prime had been silent for 12 standard hours when Commander Krextar finally noticed something wrong. His 6 arms moved across the control panels with practiced efficiency, while his compound eyes scanned multiple data streams simultaneously. The Thraxian species had evolved specifically for multitasking, making them perfect sentinels for the Galactic Coalition's border territories. But nothing in his 200 cycles of service had prepared him for what appeared on his screens that morning. The energy signature was impossible. It originated from the Void Sector, a region of space that had been declared uninhabitable for over 2 millennia. The Coalition's own record showed nothing could survive there. The radiation levels alone would cook any known vessel in minutes, and the gravitational anomalies would tear apart anything that somehow survived the radiation. Yet there it was, a massive energy bloom moving steadily through the heart of the Forbidden Zone. Krextar ran the diagnostics 3 times. Each result came back the same. Something enormous was moving through the Void Sector at speeds that challenged the fundamental understanding of physics. The commander's secondary brain, responsible for threat assessment, began firing warning signals throughout his nervous system. This was not a malfunction. This was real. The emergency transmission to Coalition Command took only seconds to compose, but Krextar knew it would change everything. Within minutes, his quiet monitoring station became the focus of the entire galactic government. Ships from a dozen different species began arriving, their crews desperate to understand what they were witnessing. The Void Sector had been quiet for so long that most had forgotten why it was quarantined in the first place. High Admiral Thranok of the Valdanian fleet was the first to arrive with significant firepower. His dreadnought, Pride of Valdania, was one of the most powerful vessels in Coalition space. The shark-like Valdanians were the Coalition's military backbone, their entire culture built around strength and dominance. Thranok's voice boomed through the communication channels as his ship took position near the monitoring station. The readings showed the unknown object was 20 kilometers in length, moving at velocities that should have required the energy output of a small star. The hull composition defied their sensors, appearing to shift between solid matter and some form of controlled energy field. Most disturbing of all, it was heading directly toward the galactic core, toward the seat of the Coalition government itself. Ambassador Velora arrived next, her crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. The Luminari were beings of living light, their bodies composed of controlled photonic matrices that allowed them to process information at incredible speeds. As the Coalition's chief historian and diplomat, Velora had access to archives that predated the Coalition itself. She had been researching frantically since receiving Krextar's alert, and what she had found in the ancient texts terrified her. The old record spoke of a species called humans who had been discovered in the early days of galactic civilization. They were considered too dangerous to integrate into galactic society, too unpredictable and adaptable. The decision had been made to isolate them in their home system using an automated containment field. The Void Sector had been created specifically to hide this quarantine zone, its deadly radiation and gravitational field serving as a deterrent to any curious explorer who might stumble upon humanity's prison. But the records also contained warnings. The species that had created the containment system had noted humanity's unusual trait of becoming stronger under pressure. They thrived in adversity, turning every challenge into an opportunity for growth. The original planners had calculated that humanity would either destroy itself within a few centuries or evolve beyond violence. They had never considered a third option, that humanity would use the isolation to prepare. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session as more data streams poured in from the monitoring station. Representatives from 57 species gathered in the Great Hall on Nexus Station, their forms a rainbow of evolution's possibilities. Insectoid craws sat next to gaseous nebulae, while silicon-based quartzlings debated with carbon-based Terrellians. Despite their differences, they all shared the same expression of concern as the holographic display showed the approaching vessel. Chancellor Morix, an ancient Etherian whose species had helped found the Coalition 3,000 years ago, called for order. His translucent form rippled with controlled energy as he addressed the assembly. The fear in his voice was barely contained as he presented the facts. An unknown vessel of impossible size and power was approaching from a region that should have killed anything that entered it. Initial attempts at communication had failed, the ship ignoring all standard protocols and frequencies. The debate that followed was heated. Some representatives called for immediate military action, arguing that anything emerging from the void sector must be hostile. Others counseled patience, suggesting that perhaps this was a new species seeking peaceful contact. The Krigari delegation, known for their aggressive expansion policies, demanded the immediate mobilization of the entire coalition fleet. Their representative, War Master Gorthak, pounded his massive fists on the council table as he spoke about the need for a preemptive strike. It was Ambassador Valora who finally brought silence to the chamber. Her crystalline form pulsed with urgent light patterns as she shared her discovery from the archives. The assembled representatives listened in growing horror as she explained the truth about the void sector. It was not a natural phenomenon but an artificial barrier, created to contain a species deemed too dangerous for the galaxy. That species had called themselves humans, and if this ship was theirs, it meant the containment had failed. The psychological impact of this revelation rippled through the council chamber. Several species had been part of the original decision to quarantine humanity, though the records had been buried so deep that most had forgotten. The guilt and fear mixed into a toxic combination as they realized what they might be facing. They had imprisoned an entire species for the crime of being too adaptable, too resilient, too capable of growth. Now that species was free, and they possessed technology that surpassed anything the Coalition had developed in 3 millennia. As if responding to their fear, the unknown vessel suddenly decelerated. The impossible speeds dropped to something more manageable as it approached the outer boundary of Coalition space. Then for the first time it transmitted a message. The signal was in perfect Coalition standard, suggesting they had been monitoring and learning for who knew how long. The message was simple but carried a weight that made every being in the council chamber freeze. This is Captain Marcus Rivera of the United Earth ship Perseverance. We have emerged from our forced isolation after 2,500 years. We come with questions about why you imprisoned our species. We come with evidence of your crimes. And we come with the power to ensure justice is served. Prepare for our arrival. The holographic display updated as the ship dropped its stealth systems, revealing its true form for the first time. The Perseverance was not just large, it was a masterpiece of engineering that defied comprehension. The hull seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living organism. Weapon ports that had been hidden suddenly became visible, each one employing technology that the Coalition's best scientists couldn't identify. Energy readings spiked to levels that made their most powerful dreadnoughts look like toys in comparison. But it was the escort fleet that truly drove home the magnitude of the situation. As the Perseverance revealed itself, so did 47 other human vessels. They had been there all along, hidden by technology that made them invisible to every sensor the Coalition possessed. Each ship was unique, designed for specific purposes that the Coalition analysts could only guess at. Some bristled with obvious weapons, others seemed to be massive carrier vessels, and still others defied classification entirely. Commander Krextar, still at his monitoring station, was the first to notice the most disturbing detail. The human ships were not maintaining standard formation. Instead, they were positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the system. It was a pattern he recognized from his military training, the optimal configuration for a complete system blockade. The humans were not just approaching, they were preparing to trap the entire Coalition leadership in the Nexus system. The realization hit the Council like a physical blow. They were not dealing with a first contact situation. They were facing a species that had spent 25 centuries preparing for this moment. Every technological advancement, every strategic development, every piece of knowledge gained had been focused on the day they would confront their captors. The Coalition had created their own worst nightmare by trying to contain humanity's potential. High Admiral Threenock's voice crackled across the communication channels, requesting permission to power weapons and shields. But even as he spoke, his tactical officers were reporting something extraordinary. The human vessels were somehow interfering with their systems, not damaging them, just preventing them from activating. It was a demonstration of technological superiority that made resistance seem futile before it even began. The reckoning hour Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the Perseverance and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. After 25 centuries of preparation, Humanity was finally free from their prison. The bridge around him hummed with activity, as his crew managed systems that represented the pinnacle of human innovation. Every console, every display, every circuit had been designed with this moment in mind. The story of humanity's imprisonment had been passed down through generations, becoming the driving force behind their entire civilization. When the alien races had sealed them in their solar system, they had expected humanity to either destroy itself or stagnate. Instead, humans had done what they always did when faced with impossible odds. They adapted, they learned, and they grew stronger. The first 500 years had been the hardest. The automated defense platforms that surrounded their system were incredibly advanced, destroying any human vessel that tried to leave. But each failed attempt taught them something new. They recovered wreckage, studied alien technology, and slowly began to understand the principles behind their prison. The platforms had been designed to last forever, powered by humanity's own sun and capable of self-repair. But they had one weakness that their creators hadn't considered. They were teaching tools. Every defensive action the platforms took provided data. Every energy signature, every weapon discharge, every sensor sweep became a lesson in advanced alien technology. Humanity reverse-engineered what they could and invented new solutions for what they couldn't. Within 1,000 years, they had not only matched the technology keeping them imprisoned but had begun to surpass it. The breakthrough had come when human scientists discovered how to manipulate space-time itself. The prison walls that the aliens had created existed in normal space, but humanity learned to step around them by accessing dimensions their captors hadn't even known existed. They could have escaped then, but the leadership of United Earth had made a different decision. They would not run. They would prepare. For the next 1,500 years, humanity had built and planned in secret. Hidden facilities in dimensions slightly out of phase with normal space allowed them to construct fleets without detection. They studied the quantum echoes of galactic communications, learning languages, understanding cultures, and mapping the political structure of the civilization that had imprisoned them. Every piece of information was cataloged, analyzed, and incorporated into their strategic planning. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim approached Rivera with the latest intelligence report. Her augmented eyes, a fusion of human biology and quantum processors, had been monitoring coalition communications since they revealed themselves. The panic among the alien leadership was evident, but more interesting were the buried guilt responses from several species. They knew what they had done was wrong, even if they had tried to forget it. The Perseverance's AI, a quantum consciousness named Solomon, materialized as a hologram beside the captain. His appearance was deliberately chosen to be non-threatening, an elderly human with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But behind that facade was the intelligence that could process more information in a second than the entire Coalition Council could in a year. Solomon had been analyzing the aliens' defensive capabilities and found them woefully inadequate. Rivera had no intention of starting a war. Humanity had moved beyond the need for vengeance during their long isolation, but they would demand answers, and they would ensure that what happened to them could never happen to another species. The blockade formation was not meant to trap the coalition, but to prevent them from making any rash decisions while negotiations took place. The Council's response came through on multiple channels, a chaos of different species trying to assert authority. Rivera ignored them all except for one, Ambassador Velora of the Luminari. Her species had been the only one to search for the truth in their archives, the only one to admit their guilt immediately. That showed integrity, something Rivera could respect. The communication between Rivera and Velora was brief but productive. She understood that humanity held all the advantages in this situation, but was still willing to negotiate in good faith. Rivera agreed to a meeting but set his own terms. It would take place on the Perseverance with a small delegation from the coalition. They would come unarmed and without escort. The implied threat was clear. Trust us as we were forced to trust you. While the politicians debated, Rivera authorized a small demonstration of human capabilities. The 47 ships in his fleet simultaneously activated their dimensional shift drives, disappearing from one location and reappearing in another instantly. No acceleration, no travel time, just instantaneous repositioning that violated everything the coalition knew about physics. The message was clear. Traditional military strategies would be useless against humanity. The coalition delegation that finally arrived consisted of 5 beings: Ambassador Valora led them, accompanied by Chancellor Morix, High Admiral Threnok, and two others Rivera didn't recognize. They were transported aboard using humanity's dimensional tunnel technology, a process that left them visibly shaken. The journey through folded space was something their minds weren't equipped to process easily. The conference room Rivera had chosen was deliberately impressive. The walls were made of programmable matter that displayed a real-time view of space around them. The table itself was grown from hybrid organic synthetic material that could adapt its shape to accommodate any species. But it was the historical display that drew the most attention. Holographic projections showed humanity's imprisonment, their struggle, and their eventual triumph over the barriers that contained them. Rivera didn't waste time with pleasantries. He presented the coalition with a detailed account of every human life lost trying to escape their prison in the early years. Every family torn apart by the isolation, every dream crushed by the knowledge that they were trapped. The numbers were staggering, and the emotional weight of them filled the room like a physical presence. But then Rivera shifted the presentation to show what humanity had become during their isolation. United Earth was not the fractured, warring civilization the coalition's ancestors had feared. The pressure of imprisonment had forced humanity to unite in ways that might never have happened otherwise. They had solved poverty, ended disease, and created a society where every human could reach their full potential. In trying to contain humanity's dangerous nature, the coalition had inadvertently created something far more powerful, a united human species with a common purpose. The terms Rivera presented were surprisingly reasonable. Humanity would not seek revenge for their imprisonment. They would not demand reparations or territory, but they would insist on several non-negotiable points. First, the coalition would publicly acknowledge what they had done and apologize to humanity. Second, they would dismantle any other containment systems they had created for other species. Third, humanity would be given a permanent seat on the Coalition Council with veto power over any decisions involving the isolation or containment of species. Chancellor Morix, his ancient form trembling with the weight of his species' guilt, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What would happen if the coalition refused these terms? Rivera's answer was simple. Humanity would withdraw from this region of space and develop in isolation, but they would also release all the information they had gathered about the coalition's crimes to every species in the galaxy. The political upheaval would likely destroy the coalition from within. High Admiral Threnok, surprisingly, was the first to speak in favor of accepting humanity's terms. The military commander had spent the entire meeting studying the human captain and had come to a conclusion. These humans were not the aggressive primitives his ancestors had feared. They had evolved into something more dangerous, a species with the power to destroy but the wisdom not to use it unless necessary. The negotiations continued for hours, working through details and implications. Humanity would share some of their technological advances with the coalition, helping to improve the quality of life for all species. In return, they would be integrated into galactic society as equals, not subjects. The dimensional drive technology would remain exclusively human for now, a guarantee of their independence. As the meeting concluded, Ambassador Valora asked Rivera a personal question. How had humanity avoided falling into despair during their long imprisonment? Rivera's answer would be recorded in coalition history as a defining moment. He told her that humans had a saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." The coalition had tried to kill humanity's spirit by caging them. Instead, they had given them the time and motivation to become something greater. The transformation of galactic society began immediately. The news of humanity's return and the truth about their imprisonment spread through coalition space like wildfire. Some species reacted with fear, others with guilt, but many with admiration for humanity's restraint. They could have emerged as conquerors but chose to be teachers instead. Within days, human vessels began appearing throughout coalition space, using their dimensional drives to provide aid where needed. A plague that had ravaged a colony world for decades was cured in hours using human medical technology. A mining disaster that would have claimed thousands of lives was prevented by human emergency response teams, who arrived instantly. Each act of assistance came with no demands, no expectations of payment. Humanity was demonstrating their value through action rather than words. The Perseverance remained stationed near Nexus Station, a permanent reminder of humanity's capabilities. But it was no longer seen as a threat. Instead, it became a symbol of redemption, proof that even the greatest mistakes could lead to positive outcomes if handled with wisdom and restraint. Captain Rivera continued to serve as humanity's primary representative, working with Ambassador Velora to smooth the integration process. The coalition's scientists were amazed by humanity's technological developments. The dimensional drive was just the beginning. Humans had developed medical nanobots that could repair any biological damage, artificial intelligences that could solve problems thought unsolvable, and energy sources that could power entire civilizations. But more impressive than the technology was the philosophy behind it. Every innovation had been developed with the goal of improving life, not destroying it. The military implications of humanity's return were equally profound. The coalition's entire defensive strategy had to be reconsidered. Traditional warfare was obsolete in the face of dimensional technology. But rather than exploit this advantage, humanity proposed a new framework for galactic defense. They would share defensive technologies while maintaining their edge in offensive capabilities. It was a balance that ensured peace through mutual benefit rather than mutual destruction. As the months passed, the initial fear of humanity faded, replaced by genuine respect and even affection. Human culture, art, and philosophy spread throughout coalition space, enriching the galactic community in ways no one had anticipated. The very qualities that had led to humanity's imprisonment, their adaptability, creativity, and resilience, became the traits most admired by other species. The truth about the void sector was finally revealed to the general population. The radiation and gravitational anomalies had been artificial, created by humanity to hide their activities from coalition sensors. Behind that barrier, they had built a civilization that spanned their entire solar system and beyond. Cities floated in the clouds of Venus, vast industrial complexes operated in the asteroid belt, and research stations studied the quantum foam at the edge of reality itself. Perhaps the most significant change was the establishment of the Galactic Rights Charter, a document primarily authored by humans that guaranteed no species would ever again be imprisoned for being different or dangerous. The charter recognized that diversity, even dangerous diversity, was essential for the growth and survival of galactic civilization. It was a lesson learned through 25 centuries of regret and redemption. Captain Rivera stood once again on the bridge of the Perseverance, looking out at the stars that humanity could finally explore freely. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity's potential, but in doing so, they had created something unprecedented. Humanity had emerged from their prison not as conquerors or victims, but as evolved beings ready to lead the galaxy into a new age of cooperation and growth. The story of humanity's imprisonment and return became a cautionary tale told throughout the galaxy. It reminded all species that fear of the unknown, fear of potential danger, could lead to terrible decisions. But it also showed that even the darkest chapters of history could have positive endings if beings were willing to learn, grow, and forgive. As the Perseverance engaged its dimensional drive to explore a distant galaxy, Rivera reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Humanity had been tested in the crucible of isolation and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than anyone could have imagined. The galaxy had tried to contain humanity's fire, but that fire had instead become a beacon of hope for all species. The coalition would never be the same after humanity's return. The power structures, the technologies, the very philosophy of galactic civilization had been transformed. But perhaps the most important change was the understanding that no species should be judged by their potential for danger, but rather by their capacity for growth. Humanity had proven that even the most dangerous species could become the galaxy's greatest asset, if given the chance to evolve on their own terms. The future stretched out before them, full of infinite possibilities, human and alien working together, exploring the universe's mysteries and building a civilization that celebrated diversity rather than fearing it. The Titan-class warship that had emerged from the void sector had not brought destruction, but had instead opened the door to a golden age of galactic unity. The galaxy had held its breath when the Colossus emerged. Now it could finally exhale and embrace the future that humanity offered. The prison had become a chrysalis, and from it had emerged not a monster, but a butterfly whose wings would carry the galaxy to heights never before imagined.